I don't think I ever really believed everything.
And I realized that quite a few of the things didn't hold water.
The actual religions were man-made from wherever.
God? Who's God? What's God?
I think that skepticism really is the first step.
Scientific zest and zeal for the real world.
That was it. I was an atheist from then on.
Has been refined into this myth of Jesus.
Hi, my name is Rad, and we have a new person here who his name is Sue, has joined the New York City Atheist Organization, and we're going to be interviewing her today. Sue, how are you, and welcome to
Hi, thank
New
you.
York City Atheists.
Thank you.
Okay. How long have you been an atheist now?
Since I was 10 years old.
10 years old?
Yes, I declared I did not believe in God. And then later on, as a teenager, I read the Bible. Mm-hmm. And of course, after reading that, I realized even if he existed, even if he appeared right there as a burning bush or talking donkey,
okay,
a la the Bible,
right,
he was not worthy of my worship, because he was a sadistic, misogynistic being who condoned rape, slavery, especially slavery, that was nasty, surprised me, human sacrifice, cannibalism, and all other sort of horrible things. So when people nowadays say, how can you be moral without God? I'm going, how can you be moral with that God? Because, right. And as James T. Kirk once said, above all else, a God must have compassion, and there ain't none in that deity.
Okay, different parts of the country have different feelings about that. You have the Bible Belt, and you have other areas in the South and in the North and the West. They're little different areas, and they have their different beliefs, or at least their strength in their beliefs, one way or the other. What part of the country were you?
I fortunately grew up in New York City, which is sort of like, yes. So it's basically I wouldn't say an atheist stronghold, but it was very easy to be an atheist here. Because it's not a small town where they know if you don't attend church. And so nobody really cared. You know, it's the greatest place for that.
Without being specific as to your job, what do you do, and what are your interests?
Well, I was a nanny, and of course, children will ask questions galore. So whenever they asked about my beliefs, I said, I believe in this, and that, and I would tell them that not everybody believed in that, and they could ask around and ask their parents. And since I never worked for any deeply religious families, they were basically holiday religious, you know, Christmas, Easter, Hanukkah, Passover, never made a difference.
And there were never any problems with families?
No, afraid not.
Oh, that's pretty good. Did you, in your family, did you have a mentor, or was it your mother, your father?
No, it was me.
It was just you?
It was me. It was Sunday school, actually. Because the big story, I think, that led me or dragged me on the road to atheism was the story of Noah's Ark, right? Because when you're a little kid, they'll hand out little coloring books, you know, and the cute little animals you color in as they're going aboard the ark. Well, that's fine when you're 4 or 5, but then you get a little older and you start asking, how did they get the pandas from China? And how did they get the kangaroos from Australia? And how did they get the llamas from South America? And they'd pat you on the head and shh, because they didn't want you to raise doubts in anyone else. And they'd say, you'll understand when you're older. Well, I'm a heck of a lot older, and it still makes no sense. And then how, after the flood, how did they get everything back to those places? Well, you know, okay, a few years pass, and I'm getting older, and I realize, according to the Bible, that after the flood, there was a handful of people left on the face of the earth, right? So does that mean that the Chinese, the Africans, Native Americans, Indians, Aborigines are all Jewish? They sure don't look Jewish. And then
the so-called lost tribes.
Yes, no, yeah, they're really lost. And that would have happened. No, they weren't lost. They were wiped out because there was just, you know, Noah and his family allegedly were the only survivors.
Right, but prior it was called the lost tribes.
That happened afterwards. No, that happened afterwards after the Sumerians or the Babylonians or somebody conquered Egypt.
I'm talking about right from Genesis, from the when you had the separation of families, and you had the different groups of people. And you had Cain that killed,
Yeah, but that's
was mocked.
but the tribes didn't come along till later because in Cain and Abel's days there were 4 people on the face of the earth or
Isn't that
whatever.
something? And then you.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing is nonsense. It's Bronze Age storytelling.
Neolithic, exactly.
Yes, and anyway, so
Were there any other key milestones that?
no, but one more thing. If you think about that, the cruelty of that deity, drowning allegedly the whole planet and all the, especially when you're a kid, all the little puppies and kittens and babies and pregnant women, so much for the sanctity of life. I mean,
So much for the innocence.
yeah, and I mean,
right.
we're supposed to worship this thing? Go ahead with your question.
Oh, those things happen. The key on that road to atheism. Were there any other key milestones
Yes.
other than just reading the biblical text?
I disproved the tooth fairy. I was sleeping over at a friend's house and one of my teeth fell out and I put it under the pillow. I didn't tell anyone and it was still there the next morning. So I figured, it's like a row of dominoes, okay, tooth fairy, I think I already disproved Santa Claus. So Santa Claus, tooth fairy, God. So
You became very skeptical about many things. And
Definitely.
And what we always say in science, question everything. And
Yes,
this is something that's
yes,
very important.
yes.
So you, in turn, questioned more things when you became aware that things were not just so kosher as you would think it would be.
Yeah, well, the thing is, at 10, I didn't even, this was way back when, I didn't even know the word atheist existed. When I was 12, I got into science fiction, right? And I read Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Oh, yes.
And I'm reading his Mastermind of Mars, and he really takes a dig at religion there. And I'm going, oh my God, there's a grown-up who doesn't believe in God. And then I realized that there are other adults in the world who might not believe in God, because when I was 10 and around that time, I remember sitting in church and the minister says, let us pray, and so all the people would, and I'd sit up and I think there was like a mural of Jesus, in heaven or something like that. And I look into his eyes and say, I don't believe in you. And yet all the adults who supposedly know everything and, know what's real and true are bowing their heads and praying. And I'm going, I can't say anything because he'll strike me dead, but I don't believe in you. It's, you're going against all the
It was that
grown-ups.
strong of a disbelief that you had.
Yeah, I don't
That you
believe
could
in
see you're wondering why the adults were doing what they
Yes.
did, and they're supposed to be the ones with knowledge and
Yes.
and
They were
experience,
supposed to-
right?
I always assumed my parents, I mean, I didn't know their backstory, but I always assumed my parents had done research and had realized that this bunch of fantastic stories is real, as opposed to, the Greek myths and Norse myths and Egyptian and all the other myths, which ancient fairy tales. So I assumed that was what was real, and that at some point I would be handed the Bible, book 2.
Yes.
With all, that there would be verifications and notifications and photos and, the whole, when you're 10 years old, you don't really realize.
Throughout your life, up until now, during that interim, did you meet other people that had the same feelings you had and that you didn't feel you were alone?
Oh, yeah. Most of my friends and the people I worked for were, as I said, they were basically either atheists or agnostics or, just holiday religious.
Right. I know you said you didn't know about New York City atheists or anything like that. Did you know of any of these other humanist organizations?
Okay, my best friend lives in Fargo, and she's a member of the Red Rivers Freethinkers. This is about 3-4 years ago, and I would visit her, and we'd go to some meetings, and it was rather enjoyable. So I said, surely in New York City, there has to be some freethinkers, right? So I Google, and there ain't none. But Google's very, very good and very smart, and up came New York City atheists. So I went to a meeting. And it was the one with David Orenstein giving his first talk, and
Book club.
It was one of the
General
Thursday
meetings?
night ones with general meetings. It was a Thursday night when he hadn't done the book club yet, and I've been a member ever since. Coming out and actually being active was the Republican, the Christian fundamentalists. Republicans declaring a war on women.
Yes.
And taking away our rights to our own bodies and I got really angry like that. For 50 years, I didn't care what people did in churches, synagogues, mosques, temples, whatever they could believe, whatever they wanted, just leave me alone. But they sort of declared war on me, so now I'm declaring war on them.
With your knowledge that you have about atheism, with your knowledge you have about theism, what advantages does this offer you in life?
Reality. I don't believe in fairy tales. When you think of it, thousands of years ago, nobody really looks at the world as it was, 5,000 years ago. There we were, little tribes scattered all over the globe. No way of knowing how we got there. No way of knowing why there were thunderstorms or changes of seasons or anything. So people would sit around the fire and make up stories, and the kids would listen and grow up and tell their kids, would grow up and tell their kids. And before you know it, these stories were reality and
legitimatized.
Really
Because it was passed on from generation to generation.
And people were very creative back then. There were J.K. Rowlings and Stan Lees and Alan Moore's.
They're creative also now.
Yes, and Neil Gaiman's back then. And, Marvel has proved with making Thor into a superhero. He used to be a god, or still is, or whatever.
From the Greek myths.
And the Greek myths and all that. So it's time to put away childish things.
Here's something I often wondered. Could you tell me how one who is an atheist reacts to a death of a loved one, and how it affects you in life, and other things that are very pertinent to you? What advantages or disadvantages?
I can't say that. I'm not fully convinced that there's nothing afterwards. I'm not hardcore atheist in that respect. There may be, there may not. We don't know this side of death. There might be oblivion, or there might be something. And all I can say is, it's part of life. Death is part of life. We all live, we all die. Eventually, the earth is going to be consumed by the sun. The sun is going to turn into a red giant, and who knows what's going to happen 80 billion years from now. But everything changes, everything evolves, and this fairy tale is really no longer pertinent to the space age. We're 50 years into the space age. We've sent people to the moon. We've sent probes to the outer planets. We've got one near the edge of the solar system. We're looking at the universe trillions of light years. There are possibly a trillion galaxies out there, and there are people who claim, they're all doomed, the aliens, if there are any, because Jesus wasn't among them.
Also keep in mind the fact that instead of having curses of diseases and stuff like that, we understand what the germ theory is all about.
And
in everyday life, you can see how this affects us because we have medicine to take care of us.
We have medicine to take care of us.
And that's based on science, not on
science.
belief.
Yes.
I understand that you were just out to a convention out in Fargo recently.
Zetedicon.
And there was a speaker there named Richard Carrier, and you mentioned to me he convinced you for a new outlook about Jesus. Could you tell me what happened and why you were convinced?
Well, okay, for most of my life, I thought that Jesus had been an apocalyptic preacher roaming the Galilee, preaching that God was coming and he would kick out the Romans out of Jerusalem and establish the kingdom of God. And of course, that pissed off the Romans so that they executed him. Very simple. And then this mythology was built up around that. So I thought, in all probability, it was an actual person. But a few months ago, I came across a web page of David Fitzgerald's work, 10 Beautiful Lies About Jesus. And that really got me thinking. And Richard Carrier actually showed how they could turn a mythological figure into a so-called real figure. And it made a lot of things make sense. Even in Sunday school, I remember some kid going, how could Paul be persecuting Christians just a few years after Jesus' death when there really weren't any Christians. But, and then he get patted on the head too, because the earliest things we have in the Bible were the letters of Paul. And the ones that are authentic, because there are several that aren't, according to the experts, treat Jesus as a mythological figure. They don't deal with his life on earth. It's only the Gospels that start
His history from childhood.
Yeah, to start creating this whole life story about Jesus. And they're not written till probably the earliest around 80 AD and possibly even later.
68 and 103 years.
Yeah, well, we're not exactly sure because we don't have any of the original originals. We only have copies of copies of copies because everything was handwritten back in those days. So any scribe could put in whatever he wanted to or eliminate or whatever. So we don't have any, facts really. So the earliest thing is Paul, and Paul's Jesus was far more a mythological figure than what later developed. And once Constantine sort of supported the establishment of Christianity, there were also hundreds of different types of Christianities back in those days, and he picked one that worked for him because it would unite the empire. It was far more political than theological, and we are left with that version of Christianity.
So you were convinced that Jesus was
a mythological figure that was worshipped even prior to the alleged events at Jerusalem. And because if you look in the Bible, okay, he was born in the reign of Herod the Great. Herod the Great died 4 BC. But, that whole running around the Middle East from Bethlehem to whatever, or back again, took place during when Quirinius, was that the guy's name? He was a census taker around 6-7 AD. So was he born in the reign of Herod, or was he born when Quirinius was doing his census? That's about 10 years.
480.
So that's about 10 years difference. And then if you think, well, he lived about 30 years. I think that's a conventional. 30 years before he began his preaching. And then according to some of the Gospels, he preached for 3 years. But I think according to John, he just preached for 1 year. So you have all these contradictions, which, of course, the true believers claim don't exist. But if you actually read the book, they do exist. And you can just see how they're all made up because, you didn't have really reporters going around asking questions. There are no contemporary writers of that era writing about Jesus. I mean, let's say from 5 BC to 35 AD. There are no contemporary writers claiming that this guy rose from the dead, or there was a giant talking cross, or there were zombie saints running around Jerusalem.
That's right.
Or a wandering star showing the Magi where to go. These are all added on, make-believe stuff added on to actually, and there's a word for it, which I'm sorry, I have forgotten, but that Carrier actually showed us there is a word for taking a mythological figure like Jesus or Zeus and then giving him a human lifespan, a time on earth where he did blank, 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 and blank, and then became mythologized, as opposed to the reality, which is where mythological figures were actually turned into actual or alleged human beings.
So you're convinced?
I'm convinced.
That he never existed?
He never existed. That's not saying that this is whole... You see, Christianity actually is a offshoot of Judaism. And one aspect of Judaism had this whole thing about a Messiah coming and the whole shebang that we now has been refined into this myth of Jesus. And as I said, there are no contemporary writings. And by contemporary, I mean 5 BC, when somebody could have noticed some star wandering around the skies, or 35 AD approximately, when there were, as I said, a man actually came alive. Also, that's not unique. In many mythologies, there are people who come back from the dead, so it's not as if he was the only one who did. You know,
The age of Pisces.
Osiris and Adonis and some of the others also come back from the dead. And there are thousands of sons of gods running around the Mediterranean world. And Israel was not in a vacuum. You know, so you're a trader, you go to Israel and you sit down at the firesides at night and you tell your stories of your myths, and they become incorporated into other myths. I mean, it's not as if they were ignorant of the world. I mean, for instance, I think there was a great flood. I just think it was a local flood because it's also in the myths of Babylon, Sumeria, Acadia, with heroes like Utnapishtim and Ziusudra. And either the Jews learned about it or experienced it because they were conquered by the Babylonians and Assyrians.
Assyrians, yeah.
And so there's a lot of interweaving of different mythologies.
Also, the poem, the Epic of Gilgamesh,
Yes.
is which occurred about between 600 to 1,000 years prior to the so-called flood.
Oh, yes, but
and
we
it was
didn't.
taken verbatim.
Yes, but we didn't know about that. You know, for what was it, 200 years ago? Maybe they started translating it.
Yes.
So for 1,800 years, we thought the legend of the flood was unique to Israel and the Jews. And
Well, Sue, I just want to say that
Yes.
we want to thank you very much for
welcome.
attending and giving your story as to what you have gone through in your experiences.
Yes.
And how you were able to cope in life based on that and your beliefs.
yes, thank
Hey,
you.
This is New York City Atheist. I'm Rad. Thank you very much.